My name is Ruth Callahan. I'm 41. I came home early that Tuesday. I wasn't supposed to be there. That's the only reason I saw it. My grandma was shaking on the couch, soaked through, too weak to read the label on her own pill bottle, the woman who taught me to read after my mom died. And not one person was helping her. At my own kitchen table, my stepmother had the papers to my house spread out, like she'd already won. She didn't even look up. "She won't need it much longer," she said, about the woman who raised me, and smiled like she'd said something kind. I didn't scream. I crossed the room, took my grandma's hand, and let my stepmother keep believing she'd won. Because the quiet ones are the ones who notice everything. And I had been noticing for months. The truth was about to come out, all in one evening, in front of every person whose opinion she'd ever cared about. If you're already sitting forward in your chair, wondering how a second-grade teacher takes a thing like that apart, stay with me. That evening is coming, and I want you in the room for it. While you're here, do me one small favor. Tap subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I like knowing who's out there. I'm Ruth. Let me take you back to how all of this started. The third step from the bottom of my staircase has creaked since the day I moved in. I know the exact spot. Left side, near the wall, a soft groan of old wood. I've stepped over it 10,000 times, carrying laundry, carrying lesson plans, carrying my grandmother's tea up to her room when her legs went bad. That creak is the sound of my house. I bought this place in 2019. I want to be honest about that, because my family was never honest about it. They called it Ruth's little place, the way you describe a dollhouse. The truth is, the bank wouldn't take a teacher's salary on its own. The loan officer slid my application back across his desk and looked at me the way my father always had, like I'd brought a child's drawing to a meeting of adults. The number came up 30,000 short. Then it came up short again when he ran it the careful way. That's when my grandmother put her name beside mine. Vera Albright was 76 then, sharp as a tack, and she had saved every dollar a careful woman saves across a long, careful life. She drove down to that bank in her good coat. She co-signed the loan without blinking. She put $40,000 of her own money into the down payment and waved off my protests like I was being silly. And when the paperwork was done, her name went on the deed, right under mine. 2 women owning one small house on one quiet street. I remember her standing in the empty living room that first day, before there was a single piece of furniture in it, turning a slow circle with her hand pressed flat over her heart. "Good bones," she said. "You did good, Ruthie." That deed is the reason all of this happened. I didn't know it yet, but I want you to hold on to it the same way I hold on to that creek. 2 names on the deed. Remember the second one. People ask me why I was so close to my grandmother, like it's a thing that needs explaining. It doesn't. But I'll tell you, because you can't understand the rest of it otherwise. My mother, Diane, died when I was 12. I won't dress it up. One winter, she was at the stove humming, and by spring there was a folded flag and a house that didn't make sound anymore. And somewhere in there, the words on the page stopped working for me. Letters slid around. Sentences came apart in my hands. My teachers called it a phase. My father called it me being difficult and went back to his newspaper. My grandmother called it nothing at all. She just set me at her kitchen table every single afternoon. Secondhand readers stacked at my elbow, a plate of saltines, the radiator ticking. And she said, slow, like there was all the time in the world. "We'll start over. From the beginning. A is the sound at the front of apple. So we started over. Letter by letter, word by word." Some afternoons I cried at the table because a 3rd-grade book wouldn't hold still, and she never once told me to stop crying. She'd just wait and push the saltines a little closer and say, "Again, from the top." Slow readers don't need less time, she told me. They need more. And when I got a hard word right, when I sounded it all the way to the end without it falling apart, She'd reach over and squeeze my hand. 3 times. 1, 2, 3. She never said what it meant. She didn't have to. I've known what it meant since I was 12 years old. She squeezed my hand 3 times. She'd done it since I was 12. 3 squeezes. Remember that one too. Vera moved into my house a little over a year ago, after the diagnosis came down and her own home got too big and too far for safe living. Early stage, the neurologist said. Some days she was completely herself, telling stories, beating me at gin. Some days she'd ask me where Diane was, and I'd have to decide all over again how much truth a frightened 83-year-old could carry in one afternoon. I would have taken her in regardless. But I want to be exact about how she came to be under my roof, because it wasn't kindness that arranged it. It was my stepmother. Charlene Callahan married my father in April of 2006. She is not blood. I need you to keep that close, because it sits at the dead center of everything that's coming. Not a granddaughter to Vera. Not a niece. Not blood in any direction. She was the woman my father married nearly a decade after he buried my mother. When my grandmother's care got heavy, Charlene didn't roll up her sleeves. She made a face like the saddest woman in the world, and she reached out and covered my hand with hers, and she said the words I'd be hearing in one form or another for the next year. Let me take that off your plate, dear. She offered to manage the mail, the bills, the doctor's calendar. You've got your hands so full with the little ones all day, she said, and the way she said little ones made it sound like I ran a daycare for pocket change. I was exhausted. I was grateful. I drove over a cardboard box of my grandmother's mail myself and handed it to her on the porch and thanked her twice. I let her take the mail. Mistake. I should tell you what it was like in my family before I tell you what they did, because otherwise you'll spend this whole story wondering why I didn't fight sooner. People always wonder that. I wonder it myself some nights. In my family, there were serious people, and then there was me. My cousin became a surgeon, and we heard about it at every holiday. My older stepbrother, I'll get to him, managed money for important men, and we heard about that too. And I taught 8-year-olds how to read, which everyone agreed, in the same tone you'd use about a craft fair, was very sweet. When I finished my teaching degree, my father didn't come to the ceremony. He had a thing. I don't remember what the thing was. I remember the empty folding chair in the row they'd saved, and I remember standing in the parking lot afterward in my gown, rubbing my thumb against my fingers like I could rub off the chalk that never really comes off a teacher's hands. Years later, after I'd been in a classroom long enough to know it was the only work I'd ever wanted, my father looked at me across the Thanksgiving table, not even unkindly, and asked, "Couldn't you do something that mattered?" The whole table kept eating. Nobody looked up. That was the worst part. That it wasn't a fight. It was just understood. Nobody looked up except my grandmother. Vera set her fork down at the head of the table and said, into the quiet, "She does the one thing not a single person in this room could do for 10 minutes. She makes a frightened child feel safe." She picked the fork back up. I'd call that mattering plenty. Nobody argued with Vera. Nobody ever did. She was the one person at every table in my whole life who would say the thing out loud, and she always said it for me. That's who they kept me away from a year ago. I need you to remember that when we get there, the single voice in that family that ever took my side, and how carefully somebody arranged for me not to hear it. In our family, caring for children was proof you couldn't do anything bigger. I stopped explaining myself after that. I just kept teaching. Charlene arrived with a son. Trevor Marsh was already grown when she married my father, her boy from before, her great pride and the centerpiece of every conversation. Trevor was a senior financial advisor. He had a firm with his own name on the door, Marsh Legacy Advisors, and a watch that cost more than my car. And a handshake he deployed like a closing argument. 2 hands, eyes locked on yours. The first big family dinner after the wedding, Charlene went around the long table introducing everyone to her side of the family, the way a host introduces the evening's entertainment. She got to Trevor, and her voice went soft and proud and slow. Then she got to me, and it sped right back up. "Trevor advises millionaires," she said with a little laugh. "And Ruth. Ruth colors with children. Both lovely." The table laughed along. "That's the thing about a woman like Charlene Callahan. She never insults you to your face. She folds the knife inside a compliment and hands it to you handle first, smiling, and if you so much as flinch, you're the one who made the room uncomfortable. I learned to take the knife and say thank you. I got very good at it." That same year, for my birthday, she gave me a gift card to a craft store. $25. The little note in her looping hand said, "For your little classroom crafts." She believed she knew exactly what I was. A small woman with a small job and small hands, good for cutting construction paper into shapes for other people's children. She underestimated the crafts. For most of a year before my grandmother came to live with me, I barely saw her. Every time I called, the call dropped. I'd hear 3 rings and then nothing, or Vera's voice for a moment. "Ruthie. Ruthie, is that..." And then the line would die. Every time I asked to come by, the timing was wrong. She was napping, she was having a bad day. The doctor had said to keep things calm, and every time, Charlene had a soft reason ready, delivered like a spoonful of medicine. "Vera gets so agitated when you visit, dear. She's fragile right now. Best to give her space." I believed her. I have to sit with that out loud, because it's true. I was raised to distrust my own read on a room and defer to the louder, surer voice. And Charlene's voice was always so sure. So I gave my grandmother space. For months, I left voicemails she apparently never got. I mailed cards I later found, still sealed, in a drawer. I told myself I was being respectful. I told myself the woman who taught me to read was being protected by someone closer to her than me. Space, it turned out, was the plan. By the time my grandmother finally came to me, I had already missed months I would never get back, and I didn't yet know why. The heat broke at school that Tuesday. The boiler gave out around 11, and they sent us home at noon. I remember the cold snap of the parking lot air, and then nothing else until the 3rd step from the bottom creaked under my shoe and something in me went still, the way it goes still when a quiet classroom suddenly isn't quiet. Charlene's car was in my driveway. That, by itself, wasn't the wrong thing. She came over sometimes to handle Vera's paperwork while I was at work. I'd given her a key during the grateful months, back when I let her take the mail. The wrong thing was my grandmother. Vera was on the couch, shaking. The front of her cardigan had gone dark and wet. She'd had an accident, and no one had come. Her hands were trembling around an amber pill bottle she couldn't read, turning it and turning it, hunting for something her eyes wouldn't give back. The television was off. The room was cold. She had been alone in it long enough to be frightened, and fear on my grandmother's face was a thing I'd never once seen in 41 years. I got down on the floor in front of her. "First things first. You learn that with children, and it turns out it's exactly the same with the people who raised you." I checked her eyes, her breathing, the color of her lips. I asked her to squeeze both my hands and felt them grip even and equal. No droop in her face, no slur, not a stroke, cold and soaked and left. I pulled the throw blanket off the back of the couch and wrapped it around her shoulders and held the water glass to her mouth until she drank. "You're cold, Grandma. I've got you." She looked at me for a long, searching moment. Then her whole face opened with relief, and she said the thing that took the floor out from under me. "Diane, is that you?" My mother has been dead since I was 12. My hand stayed flat on her shoulder. I didn't trust it to move. She called me by my dead mother's name. I got her warm. I got her dry. I changed her cardigan and tucked the blanket and sat on the edge of the couch with my hand on her back until the shaking eased and her breathing went soft and slow, and she drifted toward sleep, still gripping the hem of the throw. Only then did I stand up and walk into my own kitchen, where the overhead light was on and my stepmother was working. Charlene had the papers to my house spread across the table. The deed with my grandmother's name on it, the mortgage statement, a manila envelope, flap open, documents fanned out beside it like cards. She was running one manicured finger down the deed. Slow, the way you read a thing you're getting ready to use, and her finger stopped on the line that said, Vera Albright. She didn't look up. She won't need it much longer, she said. I stood very still in my own kitchen. Need what, Charlene? She gathered the pages then, unhurried, the way you tidy a desk you're not finished with. Oh, you're home early, she said, as though I'd walked in on her in my own kitchen. She gave me the warm, wrapped knife smile. Don't trouble yourself with all this, dear. It's grown-up paperwork. We'll talk about Grandma Vera's care when you're a little less. She searched for the word and chose it on purpose. Emotional. She slid the manila envelope toward her side of the table, but not before I saw the top page. A notary stamp, a round purple seal, a name inside it, a date. I took my phone out while she talked. I held it low, against my hip, and I took a photo before she noticed. I didn't scream. I need you to understand that wasn't weakness. A teacher learns, fast, the difference between the moment to raise your voice and the moment to quietly write down the date. My father came home as Charlene was leaving. Glenn Callahan is 70 years old, and he has spent his entire life finding the floor with his eyes whenever something hard walks into a room. He came in, and he saw his mother-in-law asleep under a blanket on my couch in a fresh cardigan, and he saw the wet one, balled up by the door, and he saw my face. And he did exactly what he has always done. He turned his wedding ring around on his finger. Once. Twice. He looked down at his own shoes. Don't start, Ruthie, he said. I'm not starting anything, I said. I'm writing it down. He left without another word. The screen door clapped shut behind him. On the windowsill over the sink, where I keep an African violet my grandmother gave me a decade ago, the little clay pot had been shoved to the very edge, crowded aside to make room for a stack of Charlene's folders. One more inch, and it would have gone over onto the floor. I picked it up and set it back in the center, where it belonged, and pressed the soil down with my thumb, out of an old habit. Then I took out a notebook. A plain one, the kind I keep 100 of for my class. I wrote the date at the top of a clean page. The time, what I'd found on the couch, what she'd said at the table, word for word. That night, I started a different kind of lesson plan. They saw a teacher who wouldn't make a scene. They never saw the notebook. The next morning, a small, sensible car pulled up at 8, and Gloria Reyes let herself in with the spare key the agency keeps. Gloria is 54, and she'd been my grandmother's part-time aide since the spring before Vera moved in, hired originally during Charlene's managing months, and kept on by me, because Vera lit up when she walked in, and because she was good at the work in a way you can't fake. I made coffee for both of us. I asked her, as gently as I knew how, whether she'd noticed anything that worried her. Gloria went quiet. She wiped down a counter that didn't need wiping. Then she set the cloth in the sink and reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook of her own. The corners were soft with handling. It was nearly full. I'm just the hired help, Gloria said, but I'm not blind. She opened it flat on the table and turned it so I could read. Inside, in the careful block print of a woman who's worked hard her whole life, were dates. Beside each one, a line, sometimes two. The days Vera was lost. The days she didn't know her own daughter from her own granddaughter. One entry read, Didn't know me today. Cried, thought I was a nurse from 1970. Another, man in suit came, leather folder. Mrs. C sent me home 2 hours early. Didn't feel right. There were a dozen like that. More than a dozen. More than I wrote down every day she didn't know her own kin. Gloria said. She wouldn't quite look at me. Felt like somebody ought to be keeping count, in case anybody ever asked. I looked at her notebook, and I thought about mine, sitting upstairs with one entry on the first page. 2 notebooks now, hers and mine. My grandmother had a good hour that afternoon. The clear ones came and went, like weather no one could forecast. You took them when they came. She was sitting up against the pillows, color in her face, and I was brushing out her hair the way she used to brush out mine after a bath, long, slow strokes from the crown. Out of nowhere, she said, pleased with herself, like a child reporting a chore well done. I signed for the nice man. My hand stopped in her hair. Signed what, Grandma? The papers for the nice man. She smiled at the window. He had such a kind smile, brought me a pen with a gold top. She reached for the name and found it, surprised and delighted. Trevor, that's the one. Charlene's Trevor. I kept my voice level and my hands moving again. Do you remember when that was, Grandma? What day? But the thread was already slipping. Her fingers started picking at the blanket, the way they did when the clear weather was passing. Where's the blue folder? She murmured, looking past me now. The nice lady lawyer gave me the blue folder. Keep it safe, Ruthie. You keep it safe for me. I didn't have a blue folder. I had never seen a blue folder. I thought it was the disease talking, a memory with no body attached, the same way she sometimes reached for Diane. So I told her I'd keep it safe, because that's the thing you say. I finished her hair, and I let it go. A nice man. A blue folder. I forgot both. That night, after she was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with the stack of mail I'd quietly begun pulling from my own mailbox again. My house, my box, my right. And I found the bank statement. I'd never had a reason to look at my grandmother's accounts. Charlene managed the finances. Vera's money had always been Vera's business, kept somewhere I had no login and no cause to ask about. But the paper statement came to my address now, because Vera lived at my address, and so there it was in front of me. And I am a woman who reads things slowly, and all the way to the end. Her pension landed every month, same as it had for years. $2,300 from the state. A careful woman's reward for a long career of careful work. And then, the same week, every single month, it left again. $1,900, transferred out. The same amount, the same kind of day. Gone to an account number that meant nothing to me. I ran my finger down the column, the way she'd taught me to run my finger under a sentence that wouldn't hold still. The savings line had read $86,000 a year ago. It did not read that anymore. It was dropping like water out of a cracked glass, withdrawal after withdrawal. Some of them landing on the exact days Gloria's notebook said, suit, folder, sent home early. $1,900, same day, every month. Not hers. My grandmother couldn't tell me what was happening to her, so I started letting the paper talk. Numbers don't get agitated, they just add up. It took me a week of evenings to lay it all out across the kitchen table. Gloria's notebook copied page by page, my own notebook. The statements pulled back as far as the bank would give me. And when I set it all side by side under the kitchen light, the thing that rose up off that table was worse than theft. It was a calendar. The money had been bleeding out for 7 months, almost $80,000, gone in steady, careful bites. $1,900 a month out the door like clockwork, plus the larger withdrawals on the suit and folder days. The savings sat at $9,000 now, and falling. I sat there and did the arithmetic 3 times, because the teacher in me doesn't trust a number she's only checked once. It came out the same every time. And then I saw the dates that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. The months the money vanished the fastest were the exact months I gave her space. The month Charlene swore my grandmother got agitated when I visited. The months I stayed away and felt guilty about it, and told myself I was being kind. I had been kept out of that house on purpose. Not because my grandmother was fragile, because I was the one person in this family who would have opened the mail. I put the pen down very carefully, and I sat with both hands flat on the table for a while, until the kitchen stopped tilting. The months I stayed away were the months it disappeared. They didn't push me out. They scheduled it. There was a family dinner that week. Charlene hosted at my father's house, the table laid with the good plates, the ones she brings out to be seen with. She waited until dessert. Then she dabbed the corner of her mouth and folded her hands and announced gently, sorrowfully, that it was time the family thought seriously about a more appropriate setting for Vera. A facility. She had a place in mind. $3,200 a month. Very reasonable. And Medicaid would help once we get the paperwork in order. Ruth's heart is so big, Charlene told the table, reaching over to pat my hand like I was a slow child. She was proud of anyway. But bless her, she's just not equipped, emotionally or financially. Across the table, my stepbrother leaned back in his chair, and his expensive watch caught the chandelier light. "Leave the real decisions to the professionals, Ruthie," Trevor Marsh said. And he smiled, the kind smile, the gold pen smile, the one my grandmother had described from her pillow. Beside Trevor sat a woman I'd met maybe 4 times in 20 years. His wife, Lindsay. Lindsay Marsh kept her eyes down on her untouched dessert. Her hands were working her cloth napkin under the edge of the table, twisting it and twisting it, the way a person twists something when they're holding very, very still on the outside. "Equipped for what exactly?" I said. Charlene's smile didn't waver. "Don't make this difficult, dear." My father turned his wedding ring around and studied the centerpiece like it owed him money. I could have laid all of it out, right there over the pie. The statements, the dates, the account number. I didn't. I smiled instead. I said, the facility sounded like something we ought to look at very carefully. Together, as a family. And I watched Charlene's shoulders come down from around her ears, because she believed the quiet one had folded, the way the quiet one always folded. I smiled. Teachers are good at waiting. I washed the dishes before I left, because someone always has to, and because it gave my hands something to do while the rest of me decided who I was going to be. The water went cold and gray in the sink. I stood at my father's counter with my sleeves pushed up, and I finally understood a thing I should have understood 20 years before. They didn't hate me. That was never it. A woman like Charlene doesn't waste good hatred on someone she's already filed under harmless. The reason they needed me small, the reason they kept me away from my grandmother, the reason my own father couldn't lift his eyes to mine, it wasn't that I was nothing to them. It was that I was the only one standing close enough to see. They didn't need me gone from the family. They needed me quiet inside it. So, all right. I would be quiet, and I would be busy. I dried my hands on a dish towel that wasn't mine, and I drove home through the dark. And from that night on, I never argued with a single one of them again. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to file. Before I tell you who I called the next morning, let me ask you something, because I've turned it over 100 times since. If it were your grandmother on that couch and your name on that deed, who would you have gone after first? The stepmother smiling at the head of the table? Or the man in the good watch telling you to leave it to the professionals? Tell me in the comments. I read them. Then stay with me, because the choice I made surprised even me. The county building has a particular fluorescent light that makes everyone underneath it look tired and patient at the same time. I sat in a small beige room with a folder of my own, Gloria's notebook copied, My notebook, the statements with the transfers highlighted in yellow. And I told a stranger everything in the flat, plain order I'd practiced out loud in the car. The stranger was an investigator with Adult Protective Services. He let me talk. He took notes and didn't interrupt and didn't make the face people make when they think a teacher is about to cry, because I wasn't going to. When I finished, he sat back and tapped the edge of my notebook with his pen. "You did the right thing, keeping records, ma'am," he said. "Most people don't. Most people come in here with a feeling and a phone number. You came in with dates." He told me what would happen next. Plainly, 3 steps. No jargon I'd have to nod along to and look up later. An assessment, a financial review, coordination with the bank. He said records win cases. I had records. Then he looked up from the file, and something moved across his face, and he set the pen down flat on the table. "This is going to sound strange," he said, "but you probably don't remember me, Ms. Callahan. 2nd grade, Pruitt, Daniel Pruitt." He almost smiled. "You taught me to read." I looked at him, really looked, and under the county lanyard and the tired light and the man's jaw. There was a boy I hadn't thought about in 18 years, a small boy who used to slide chapter books into his desk and shut the lid because the other kids were faster and he'd rather hide than be slow out loud. Daniel Pruitt was 26 now, with a badge and a caseload and a steady voice. "You sat with me at the back table," he said. "You told me slow readers don't need less time. They need more. I almost didn't make it out of that grade, and then I did because of—" He stopped and cleared his throat and picked the pen back up like he needed something in his hand. "Anyway, I'm telling you that, so you know. We're going to take this seriously. All the way." The boy I taught to read now read their paperwork. Daniel referred me to an elder law attorney, a woman named Frances Doyle, who had seen every version of this story in 30 years and still got angry at exactly the right parts. I sat across her desk with my folder, and she went through it the way I go through a child's reading assessment, finger moving down the page, missing nothing, her mouth getting flatter as she went. When she finished, she took her glasses off and folded them. "All right," Frances said. "Here is what we can do. We can challenge the power of attorney they're operating under. We can freeze the accounts they've been draining today with the bank. And we can put a flag on that deed so that no one transfers a square inch of that house while we sort this out." She set 2 fingers on the highlighted statements. "But I need dates, Ruth. Exact ones. The day they claim she signed. The days she wasn't competent to sign anything. The day every dollar moved." "I have a notebook full of dates," I said. Frances Doyle smiled for the first time since I'd walked in. "Then give them to me. Dates are how people like this fall, not feelings." Dates. Dates. I had a notebook full of dates. For the first time in my whole life, I wasn't the only one who believed me. Now I just had to prove it, on paper. Frances moved fast. Within days, she had a copy of the power of attorney that Charlene and Trevor had been operating under, the single document that gave them the legal right to touch my grandmother's money, her care, and her half of my house. It was a durable power of attorney. It was signed in a shaky version of her hand by Vera Albright. And it was dated the 3rd of March, last year. I sat in Frances Doyle's office, and I matched that date against my grandmother's medical records, against Gloria's notebook, against the line I'd written in my own. On the 3rd of March, my grandmother was in an emergency room. She'd had a bad spell. A frightening one, the kind that put her in a hospital bed overnight, nonverbal for hours, not knowing her own name, or the year, or the faces around her. Gloria's notebook said it in plain block ink. Bad day. Didn't know me. Hospital. The ER intake sheet had the timestamps printed down the margin. The plastic wristband, which the hospital had bagged and sent home with her belongings, had the date stamped right across it. She could not have read a document that day. She could not have understood one. She could not have walked into a notary's office, taken a pen with a gold top, and signed away anything at all. I signed for the nice man, she'd told me, brushing the thought happily through her hair. On the 3rd of March, my grandmother was in an ER. The same day she supposedly signed her own house away. You can't sign your house away from a gurney. The notary stamp on that document, the round purple seal I'd photographed off my own kitchen table while Charlene talked down to me about grown-up things, led somewhere too. Frances ran it down. The notary turned out to be a woman from Charlene's church circle, someone who did the occasional stamp on the side as a favor. And in our state, a notary is required by law to keep a journal, a bound logbook, every signing recorded in it, name, date, signature, sometimes a thumbprint. It's not optional. It's the whole point of the office. There was no entry for the 3rd of March. None. The journal ran clean from the last day of February to the 5th of March and skipped right over the day my grandmother supposedly sat down and signed. Frances laid it out for me in 3 flat sentences, and I have never forgotten the shape of them. No journal entry, she said. No valid notarization. No power of attorney. The whole machine they had built, the authority to move the money, to place my grandmother in a home, to reach a hand toward my deed, rested on that single stamped page. And the page came apart the second anyone with a flashlight looked at it. Her whole plan rested on a stamp that lied. I expected the next piece to arrive by subpoena. It arrived on my doorstep instead. Lindsay Marsh stood on my porch on a gray afternoon, no makeup, a manila folder clutched against her chest like a shield she was hiding behind. Trevor's wife. The woman who twisted her napkin into a rope at the dinner table while everyone else ate pie. She couldn't get the words out at first. She stood there working her jaw, looking past me into the house. And when the words finally came, they came all at once, in a rush, like something breaking loose. I never see the statements, Lindsay said. He handles all of it. I thought we were just doing well. I thought he was good at his job. Her voice cracked clean down the middle, and she pushed straight through it. And then I started finding things. Other clients, other old people, and things at home that She stopped. There was some private wound in there, some second betrayal she didn't owe me the details of, and I didn't ask. I thought he was brilliant. I didn't know brilliant meant stealing from people like your grandmother. She held the folder out to me with both hands. Inside were records. Trevor's records, the kind a spouse isn't ever supposed to find. My grandmother's name was in there, so were at least 5 others. 5 more families. 5 more careful old people with 5 more careful lifetimes of savings, and 1 kind smiling professional in a good watch standing over all of it with a gold-topped pen. There was more in there than account numbers. Frances would pull the rest of it later. The careful little messages between my stepmother and her son, planning the timing of the whole thing. One from Charlene, months back. Easier to deal with the paperwork once she isn't lucid. One from Trevor, 2 weeks before the party. We finalized the house after the anniversary, when everyone's distracted. They hadn't simply stolen from a confused old woman. They had put it on a calendar, and they had checked it twice. I thought about how alone I'd felt at that dinner table, the only one who saw. And here, on my porch, shaking, was somebody else who had finally looked. His own wife handed me the last piece. I had the dates, the money, the stamp, and a witness none of them ever expected. Now, I just needed a room. I want to stop for 1 second and tell you the part that kept me standing, because it wasn't anger. Anger runs out. I was doing all of this, the lawyer, the bank, the boxes in the garage at midnight, while still teaching 2nd grade every single day. 22 8-year-olds who needed their reading groups, whether or not the rest of my life was on fire. And somewhere in those weeks, without my ever asking, the other teachers on my hall started covering for me. A reading block taken here, a recess duty quietly swapped there. A travel mug of coffee left on my desk before the morning bell. No note attached. The woman across the hall slid a card into my bag one afternoon, and all it said was, "We've got your class. Go do what you have to do." I have spent my whole life being told my work was small. The people who actually do that work knew better. They carried me, quietly, the same way I had spent 18 years carrying other people's children. Francis filed all of it at once. By the end of that week, the accounts Charlene and Trevor had been draining were frozen, locked tight by the bank the moment the fraud report and the emergency petition landed on the right desks. The monthly transfers stopped cold. The withdrawals stopped. An open Adult Protective Services investigation now sat underneath the whole thing, and an emergency petition asked a judge to undo every scrap of authority that Forged Page had ever pretended to grant. I told my family none of it. Charlene was still texting me about the facility paperwork, little reminders with little hearts. Trevor was still sending his breezy messages about getting everything squared away before the party. They believed the machine was humming right along, that the quiet one was sitting at home waiting to be told where to sign her name. I wrote back that I'd check my schedule, and I meant it, in a way. I was checking a schedule very carefully that week. Just not the one she thought I was. By Friday, the accounts she'd been draining wouldn't open for her. She was going to find out at the worst possible moment. And then I found the blue folder. I'd written it off, the nice lady lawyer, the thing my grandmother kept asking me to keep safe. But Gloria, helping me go through boxes from Vera's old house that had ended up stacked in my garage, mentioned in passing that Charlene had once spent a whole afternoon over there, tidying Vera's old papers, the boring legal ones. Bless her heart. And something turned over hard in my chest. I went through every box in that garage myself. It took 2 nights on the concrete floor under a bare bulb. And at the bottom of a carton of Christmas ornaments, wrapped in tissue paper like something breakable, was a blue folder. Inside was a power of attorney and a will. Both of them executed in 2019, the same year my grandmother put her name on my house, the same year she was sharp as a tack and certain of every word. Drawn up properly, signed properly, witnessed and notarized and filed by an attorney whose business card was still paper-clipped to the inside cover. The nice lady lawyer. And in those documents, my grandmother named exactly one person to make her decisions, and exactly one person to inherit what was hers. Me. Only me. She chose me in 2019, named me, signed it, filed it. Charlene just hid the copy. Tucked inside the folder was one more thing. A single sheet of lined paper, folded once down the middle, my name on the front in her good, firm hand from the years when her hand was still firm. I sat down on the cold garage floor with my back against a box, and I unfolded it, and I read it the way she taught me to read everything that ever mattered. Slowly. Ruthie, if you're reading this, then I'm either not myself anymore, or I'm gone. Either way, you listen to me one more time. You were never the quiet one because you had nothing to say. You were quiet because you were always the one listening. Don't you ever let a single soul tell you that's a small thing to be. The house is yours. The money is yours. I am yours, sweetheart, for as long as I last and after. I taught you to read, so read this next part slowly. You were always enough. You were always more than enough. 3 squeezes. Grandma. I read it once to myself. Then I read it again, out loud, alone on the garage floor, the way she taught me, and my voice did not make it to the end. I sat there a long while with the paper in my lap. Then I folded it back along its old crease, and I slid it into my bag, right next to the notebook. I was the rightful one all along. The anniversary party was 2 weeks out. 20 years of marriage. Charlene had been planning it for months, exactly the kind of event she lived for. The whole church would be there, the charity board women, every single person whose good opinion held up the story of who Charlene Callahan was. She'd told me, weeks before, that she planned to share a little update on Grandma Vera's care with all of them. A short speech. She wanted witnesses to her kindness. She wanted to stand up in front of the people who admired her and be admired a little more. I could have stopped the party. I could have filed everything quietly and let the court grind forward in beige rooms with nobody watching. But I thought about my graduation and the empty folding chair. I thought about a $25 gift card for my little classroom crafts. I thought about a woman with a manicured finger on my grandmother's name, saying she won't need it much longer over a wet cardigan, and smiling like it was a kindness. She wanted an audience for her kindness. I would give her one. Let her perform first, then I'd grade it. The party was in a banquet hall with chandeliers and a long table of food, and a microphone on a little chrome stand near a 3-tier cake. I came in a plain dark dress with my grandmother on my arm. Vera had a clear morning, thank God, steady on her feet, her hand light on my elbow, and with my bag over my shoulder. Francis had told me exactly what I could say in that room and what I couldn't. The rest of it I'd decided on my own. Charlene worked the room in cream-colored silk, kissing cheeks, accepting compliments on the flowers. Trevor held court by the bar with a glass of something amber, the watch flashing every time he gestured. My father stayed near the wall, turning his ring. And off to one side, pale, half hidden behind a column, stood Lindsay Marsh, watching the door. When she saw me, she gave the smallest nod I've ever received, and the most important. After the toasts, Charlene tapped a fork against her glass, and the room hushed and turned to her, warm and expectant. And she took the microphone and began to speak about family, about sacrifice, about the heavy, holy burden of caring for the elderly, and the hard choices a person makes out of love. She gestured, graceful and sorrowful, toward my grandmother in her chair, and she said it was time, as a family, to move dear Vera somewhere she could be properly looked after. Then she found me across the room, and she smiled. And dear Ruth tried her best, she said into the microphone. Truly she did, but some of us just have to be the strong ones. I stood up, I crossed the floor to the little chrome stand. I held out my hand for the microphone. Before we toast, I said, may I add something about that care? I asked for the microphone. She smiled and she handed it to me. Mistake. I set my bag on the table beside the cake. I opened it, and I took the pages out one at a time and laid them down where the chandelier light could reach them. The notebook, the bank statements, the document dated the 3rd of March. My grandmother's savings were $86,000 a year ago, I said. Today they're $9,000, the rest left in pieces, same week, every month. A murmur moved through the room. Charlene's smile held, but her chin came up. Those are private, she said, sharp now. She's confused. She signed everything willingly. I picked up the page dated the 3rd of March. She couldn't have, I said. On the 3rd of March, she was in an emergency room. She didn't know her own name that day. I have the wristband. I have the intake record, and the notary who stamped this never logged it, because it never happened. The smile cracked at one corner. Across the room, Lindsay Marsh stepped out from behind her column, and her voice came out clear and flat and final. None of his money is real, Charlene, Lindsay said. None of it. Trevor came up off the bar stool. Now, hold on. The breezy professional was gone in an instant. The words came tumbling, fast, defensive. Those documents were properly executed. I personally oversaw the room stopped looking at me. It looked at her. I lifted the blue folder up where everyone could see it. "This is the real one," I said. "Signed in 2019, when she knew exactly what she wanted." The room had gone silent. Chandelier silent. 200 people not breathing. And Charlene's mask came off, all at once, in front of every face she had ever performed for. "That house should have been ours," she said. Loud, ugly, every soft thing stripped out of it. "She's senile. What does it even matter?" For 20 years, I had called her Charlene. I didn't call her anything now. "It matters because she's my grandmother," I said. "And because you were never family. You were a fraud with a casserole dish." My father lifted his head. For one full second, Glenn Callahan looked his wife dead in the face. Then he looked down at the floor, but he did not say one word in her defense. Not one. "The accounts are already frozen," I told the room evenly. "There's an open investigation. She will never sign anything for my grandmother again. She had performed kindness for 20 years. The audience finally saw." In the middle of all of it, the rising voices, the chairs scraping back from tables, Charlene's face gone blotched and wild under the chandeliers. I set the microphone down on the little chrome stand, and I walked back across the room to my grandmother's chair, and I knelt down in front of her. The clear morning was still holding. Her eyes found mine, and stayed there. She reached out, and she took my hand, and she squeezed it. Once, 2, 3. 3 squeezes. She was in there. She knew me. She knew me. That was the whole war won. If you have ever been the quiet one, a whole family counted on staying quiet, the one who noticed everything and was told to keep it to herself, then you already know exactly what that hand felt like in mine. I'd love to hear your story. Tell me in the comments who finally saw you, the way she saw me. I read every single one. The rest of it happened the way Frances said it would. Slowly, through doors I never had to knock on myself. The notary lost her license and was charged. Trevor Marsh's firm came apart at the seams the moment the first of those families filed. And then the others came forward, all 5, and then more after that. Names I'd never heard, careful old people from 3 counties over. The state pulled his license. The district attorney took the rest. The church board that had adored Charlene for 20 years held a short, quiet meeting and asked her, with great regret, to step down from every committee she'd ever chaired. The story she had spent 2 decades building about herself was finished, and she'd narrated the last page of it into a microphone, by herself, in front of everyone. I never had to lay a hand on her. Word travels in a town like ours faster than any court date. By the next week, the story had a life of its own. At the grocery store, in the church parking lot, in the comment threads on the local pages. People who had spent 20 years admiring Charlene Callahan's flower arrangements were suddenly doing the math on whose grandmother might have been next. She stopped going out. The casseroles she'd been so famous for carrying to other people's tragedies stopped leaving her kitchen because there was no longer a single doorstep in that town that wanted her standing on it. My father and Charlene are still married, as far as the paperwork goes. He calls me sometimes now. He hasn't apologized. Not really. Not in any way I'm ready to accept. And I've made my peace with letting that stay unfinished for as long as it needs to. Lindsay Marsh sent me a text a few weeks after the party. She kept me from making it worse. I owe her the truth. We aren't friends exactly. But she answers when I call, and I answer when she does. And maybe that's its own kind of mending. The slow kind, the kind that takes. I didn't have to ruin Charlene Callahan. She had built the whole thing out of things that break. I never touched her. The truth did all of it. My grandmother is still with me. The court named me what the blue folder always said I was, the one who decides, the one who protects. Her money came back, Most of it clawed out of frozen accounts and a forced repayment. The deed is safe. Both our names are still on it, right where she set them. 2 women and 1 small house on 1 quiet street. She has more bad days than good ones now. That's the disease, and I've made my peace with the arithmetic of it, the way you make peace with weather. But on the windowsill over the sink, the African violet she gave me a decade ago is blooming again. I repotted it that spring, gave the roots more room, and it took. And now it throws out new flowers every few weeks, like it's showing off. And in the evenings, when she gets restless and the light goes long and gold across her quilt, I sit on the edge of her bed with one of the old secondhand readers, and I read to her, slowly, the way she taught me. Last night it was a battered copy of a book about a spider who saves a pig. She didn't follow the story, but every time I reached the bottom of a page, her hand found mine on top of the quilt. She remembers the squeeze. Whatever else the disease has taken, it hasn't found that yet. People still ask me who I am now, like the question belongs to my family. It doesn't anymore. I'm not the disappointment with the small job. I'm not the harmless one who colors with children. I'm the teacher who reads to the woman who taught her, and who kept the receipts. If there is someone in your life who needs your silence to keep their story going, I promise you this. That story was never yours to begin with. You don't have to be loud to be believed. You only have to be patient, and you have to write it down. And you do not need anyone's permission, not your family's, not anyone's, to come home to yourself. I'm Ruth Callahan. I kept the records. I came home. Tonight, before she sleeps, I'll take her hand on top of the quilt, and I'll squeeze it. 1, 2, 3. I love you too, Grandma.